Hey guys, and welcome to the little bonus segment of Get Out where we compare the script to the screen. So let's just jump right in. Assuming that you've already listened to the podcast or at least have watched part one where we analyzed Jordan Peele's #1 best screenplay, Get Out, this is how the screenplay compares to what was on screen. I assume most of you have already watched Get Out, so this will be very fun for all of us. So let's dive right into the opening. The cold open in the actual movie is about 2 minutes compared to the 5 pages, which equates to 5 pages, of what Jordan Peele originally wrote. Yet it accomplishes the same exact thing, that a black man is being kidnapped. Also, what's different is that in the original screenplay, it sounded like Andre was pretty familiar with the area. This is probably a route that he's always jogged before. And now in the screen version, he has been asked to come to this location. So he's never been here before. He's new and he knows he needs to get out. What they also did is they toned down so much of the scene. There used to be the Shaw family, which afforded some juxtaposition. This medievally masked man was also listening to a French tutorial going on in the car, which actually would have made more sense given the screen version of Jeremy, but we'll get into that in a bit. The medievally masked man also had a gun with a silencer on it, and now this sort of attack on Andre is like a sneak attack, and he's able to put him in a chokehold and drag him back to his car. A lot less violence, a lot less noise, obviously since it's night in a white suburban area. And at the end of the cold open, Andre, he's in that trunk. Now, I touched very lightly on Jeremy, which we'll get to, but let's go through some of the characters beforehand. First, we have Rose, a perfect personification of what Jordan Peele had written. Caucasian, brunette with freckles, cool and beautiful like an old summer camp crush. This is exactly the Rose that they casted. You can tell she's very confident. She's also a little bit domineering, and there were 2 lines in particular that I was happy they took out of the actual movie. For one, when Rose brings Chris first to the estate in the car, she's like, "That's the groundskeeper. I think his name is Walter." I found this to be weird for her to say because the last time she's been home, and she said it in the script, was 10 months. But, I think she would know the groundskeeper's name. So I was happy to see that that was omitted, as well as this point that I brought up in the script analysis video, but also in the podcast as a whole, is that I was personally shocked that Rose was even a part of this whole thing because of this past experience being hypnotized by Missy too. So I'm very happy that when we did come to this scene that she also did not have a similar experience of being hypnotized by Missy. Clearly with Missy and her hypnotizing, it's very easy to be manipulated, and now there's absolutely no doubt that Rose is just a psychopath. Next up, we have Chris, played brilliantly by Daniel Kaluuya. I really like all of his little nuances and how coyly he played the character. He is, to a T, again, what Jordan Peele wrote, a very handsome African-American man, shirtless, naturally athletic. They were squeezing on his biceps at the auction. And scrutinizes his reflection with a touch of vanity. He had that whole cutting his chin with the razor blade scene, and it worked out great, exactly how I pictured it when reading it. Next are the parents. Now, I thought they nailed Dean to a T. He's this bubbly-ish kind of man. I don't know. It's definitely Missy's wearing the pants in the relationship, which I like. I'm happy to talk about both of them at the same time because in the screenplay, it seems that Missy was more one-dimensional, but the actress who plays her shows a lot more of her dominance by showing and not what was written. When she's listening to this conversation that they're having when they're getting to know Chris more, just by her actions, you can tell that she kind of is in control of everything. And he says it too. He says relaxed and in control, but just reading the screenplay to get that wasn't enough. Actually seeing it made me realize, okay, she actually does play a bigger part in this than it comes off the page. And on top of that, we now can see where Rose sort of gets her dominance from, because I'd say Rose is a little bit dominant in their relationship. You know, she takes a cigarette, throws it out. When they get into the car crash, she's the one who says, "Are you okay?" You know, and not the other way around. So that's definitely a relationship dynamic that is also transparent in her parents. Now, of course, Dean is amazing. Dean is my man. I mean, Dean's a terrible person, but he's like so likable and bubbly. And I liked that in the film they actually had him say garbage instead of garbage. I love how he wrote that and then it made it in. That was fantastic. Obviously, before we meet the parents, we did meet Rod over the phone. Hilarious, exactly who I would have pictured. And actually, I thought that he played his character way more funnier. I loved the way that he interpreted some of the lines. Now, here's the one, I'm not gonna say miscast, but one that I'm not sure about. I think he's got the rich kid intense down pat. I think he's a very handsome guy. I think what I didn't like is that he sounded like he's from abroad. Like, he didn't sound American. Like, this is a very white centric Lake Potomac white family, and he sounds like he's been in international boarding school for years, which doesn't make sense because he's supposed to be in med school. And I just thought the way that he played drunk was very like super strung out. I'm not sure if I really saw Jeremy that way. I saw Jeremy more in the way that Rafe was in Outer Banks. I'm trying to say, like, there's more of like this mature cynicism with Rafe rather than however this character was playing Jeremy. I wish I was able to describe that better, but I think out of all of the characters, he was the one that acted a lot different than I thought. And also, I might just be thinking that way because in the original screenplay, Jeremy was a year older than Rose, but in the movie, they actually made him younger than Rose, which could then explain why he's just so, like, irrational. He still doesn't sound quite white American, but, you know, I digress. Next, we have The Help, or Grandma and Grandpa, which is literally still so crazy to this day. I think these were by far them and Rod. I mean, honestly, everybody really held their own, but their performances were absolutely insane. Once you understood the context, because once you learned that like a percentage, very small percentage of who they once were was still in that body, reading that, knowing that beforehand, before watching the movie, and then seeing how trapped Georgina was inside, but also understanding that it's the grandpa and grandma talking and not them, was very like, they played it down. They played their characters down. Walter in particular, I think out of all of the line reads, his is one that I could have never predicted. That this actor is like literally amazing. I had to even include a clip.
Nothing I don't want to be doing.
Yeah. I didn't get to meet you actually up close. I'm Chris.
I know who you are. She is lovely, isn't she?
I love his enunciation. I just love the way he speaks. And see, so he is speaking as his grandfather, let's just say. And based on the way that Missy speaks, Rose speaks, like very I won't say eloquently, but you know, very like American. I'm just confused why Jeremy sounds like he has a little bit of an accent. But again, I digress. I'm sorry for bringing it up again. Next, we have Georgina. I love what they did in the movie for this because I remember reading the screenplay, says it right here, that moment where Chris thinks that Georgina can see him, but really she's just looking in the reflection through her teeth. I was like, oh, okay, like, you know, it's a one-sided window or something like that. But I love that they went even further, and then they also showed it another time of her actually, like, ogling at her reflection because, you know, she's younger, she's arguably more beautiful, and she is just like obsessed with her looks now. And again, knowing the context that I knew watching the movie, it was absolutely insane. Like, grandma, you're sick. I think for me, I truly think like this is probably one of the most standout performances because she's really in this scene battling like 90% grandma, 10% who she originally was. It's just so intense. It's so well acted. I'm really happy that what he was trying to accomplish here was really coming through on the screen. So now let's compare the script locations to the screen locations. First with Chris's apartment. Yep, that's New York for ya. His bed's literally like in the living room, the dining room is behind it, the kitchen's right next to it. It's just a studio apartment to a T. Now this is where I become a villain because this estate was nothing like how I imagined reading this. I mean, just given the words that Jordan writes himself, a large mansion. This, in my subjective opinion, is not a mansion. This is like a, upper middle class family home, which is no problem at all. I just was expecting something like American Gangster, like this big old property right here, towering off the sides like this. Like I could have imagined that in the auction going on right here. But we've got a good old suburban house, which, doesn't really change much. It really doesn't matter what their tax bracket is. I just think like obviously comparing the way in which Jordan wrote their estate to look like, this was definitely not a match. Same I would say inside of the house, which I think is even more disappointing than outside of the house, especially since we know that this is like a family house. I mean, I don't know many homes that have like these solid walls like this that have been in the family for, it has to have been more than like 40 years or 60 years. I mean, imagining however old they are. I could also just be making up that context. I don't know if they bought this house then moved their parents in, or if it was their parents' homes. Anyway, let's just say, based on what Jordan Peele wrote, the inside of the house was subjectively underwhelming for me. As I mentioned in the script analysis, I was really looking forward to the medieval battles. Taxidermy, there was no taxidermy upstairs. There's only one taxidermy, and it was a deer's head downstairs in the basement, so like later on in the film. But, I digress, right? It's not about the look of the house at the end of the day. It's fantastic script. I'm just a little picky. And maybe just one more thing I'm a little picky about. I really wanted to see Rose's pink room. I love what Jordan says. It's preserved in the state of a young-minded teenage girl. Lots of pink and dated boy band posters, a stuffed lion. And which is true, there was a stuffed lion. There's no boy band posters, but I loved what that setting had set up for their character. But, in the movie, they did make up for it because then they have this shot. Absolute psychopath eating cereal and drinking milk. You're a child, babes. And I feel like this shot pretty much accomplishes what that pink bedroom was supposed to portray about Rose. On top of that, this is probably like, I would talk about this scene for a lot longer than I would be like, hey, by the way, did you know that Rose's bedroom was pink? Like, this scene is crazy. Fruit Loops and cereal. Also in part 2, when I talk about budgeting and how if I was to make this on an indie level film, that I would shoot the Chris's flashback already in the house. And this proves my point. This is how it looked like in the film. This is just any empty bedroom in the house that you can easily set up Chris's old room to have looked like back in the day. And on top of that, now this definitely looks like a black box, and definitely looks like there had to have been maybe some sort of cable maybe. But the point here is that it looks great. It looks exactly like what he wrote. Chris continues to slowly fall backwards. Missy approaches on the screen above him. It's way more harrowing. I loved that in the film they actually made it silent. There wasn't the sound of insects, like the Animal Kingdom. Instead, it was just water sounds, like underwater. And then lastly, also in part 2, I talked about how the operation room was probably going to be the most expensive set build. I love all of this. I think my biggest thing here is I really just love the use of space. Like, this These things in particular just make this all so interesting to look at. I'm just going to ignore these candles right there because they were clearly placed there just for the fire. Alright, so now we're going to get into the bread and butter. This is my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to script analysis, and that is the color. The colors in this film there's a lot to say about it. First of all, let's start with I want to say scheme, but it didn't follow the entire film, but there's like traces of a primary scheme. I have an ongoing theory that most director debut films have a primary color palette plus green. Looky here. We have Wes Anderson's Bottle Rocket top left. Right here, we've got the yellow, the red, the blue. Over here, this is Catherine Bigelow. We've got the red lips, the yellow dress. We've got the blue car. Down here, we've got Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets. We got the blue shirt. We've got the red couch. We've got the yellow lamp. And in all three of these, we also have green grass, and some green painting. Right, guys? Like, 3 is enough where it's like not even a hypothesis anymore. But now let's make it 4, because right here, this is a still from Get Out. This is when Rod is babysitting Chris's dog. We've got the blue shirt. We've got a little red detail right here. We've got yellow chairs. And then we have this, random airplane model that happens to be green. We've got a primary and green color scheme going on in this as well. I mean, it goes right down to Jeremy's stripe in his shoe. He has a red stripe to complete the scheme. And even in this shot, it's absolutely crazy, but like the red blood completes this color scheme in this shot as well. Even though I would have loved to have seen her pink bedroom, but I will get over that. Rose herself also had this color scheme. She has this poster right up here, and also her walls are basically green. So that was production design. Now let's get into the color of the costumes, and this is where it gets crazy and exciting. Everybody here is dressed in white, black, gray, and wearing some sort of red. We've got a red pocket square, red tie, red glasses frames. We get down to the nitty gritty. On top of that, even Rose is wearing red. She's wearing a red striped top here. Now, even though a very few amount of characters don't wear red, the distinction here is not between red and blue altogether, but the fact that blue in itself represents being outside of the circle, and red represents being inside of this whole operation circle and sort of knowing what's going on. Red and the adjacent colors of white and black. I would love to talk to the costume designer to know why they didn't give them any detail of red, but follow along with this theory because I'm right. We also got a lot of beige in there. So we've got blue, we've got red, and we've got some variation of a yellow. Now, obviously, as we can see, Chris is the one who wears blue. On top of that, we're back with Andre. This is the guy who got kidnapped at the beginning, and now he's showing back up, almost about 80% blend in with them, but he has this blue stripe on his head. And again, the blue, not a part of the world. And as we know, with the context of the whole brain transplantation, there's still a sliver of him, which is who Chris is as a whole, a sliver of blue innocence, if you will. The costume designer wanted Chris in blue so much that they even gave him blue laces. But simply put, blue, we're on the good side, okay? We're innocent. This whole messed up operation brain transplantation world that we're in. Now also in the scene comes the auction. And as we can see, there are different couples obviously trying their hand at seeing if Chris would be the best fit and if they should, this is terrible, but if they should bid and buy him. Now, if we just paid attention to the color, it is very obviously foreshadowed to us who will be winning the auction, and that is Mr. Jim right here. Jim may appear to be dressed in black, but he has just a sliver of blue popping out under. I also love this. I think beige sort of acts as the middle ground between these two colors, and they're both sort of in the middle of this whole thing. But what I like here is that the color also informs their roles. As I mentioned, throughout the film, it was the actress who played Missy who made me understand more of her dominance in this whole operation, and Dean just seemed more of obviously like a present talkative figure, but he wasn't really running the whole thing. He was just, doing the neurosurgeon part of it. And I love that they accentuated that in the styling. Obviously, Dean has the red pocket square, so he's guilty as charged. But I love that they put Missy in this blue necklace because similarly to what we saw Andre in, Andre again, beige, trying to blend in, but they're still a part of who Chris embodies in his body. And Missy is the link between those two. In my opinion, I'd say Missy is like the runner of this whole operation. It's accentuated more because of this blue necklace. If we want to go further into the costumes, they also further develop as we get through the film. Rose is acting as if she's on Chris's side, also dressing in blue during that police scene. Same with the dinner, she's wearing blue. And then the morning of the auction, she sits on the bed in more of a purplish shirt. She's in the middle of both of these worlds right now. So the blue and the red, they're blending together. And then once we get to the party, she has officially turned into one of them and now wears red. We can also see throughout the film that when these characters are wearing red is when they do their part in this whole operation. For Missy, her work starts this night. At the dinner, when Jeremy comes home and does his whole drunken spiel, she's wearing a red top. Later that night, she hypnotizes Chris. Next is Rose's job to present Chris at the auction. Here she's done that. And step 3 is to actually complete the auction, which is Dean's job, and that's what he's doing right here with his red pocket square. Now with Jeremy, I love it because this is the first outfit we see him in. This is what we meet him in. He's just an open book. He's rowdy. He's not gonna hide it. He actually, I think he revels in what they do, and there you go, bright red pants right in front of you. But everybody else sort of gradually gets to this point. Going back to blue, we can also confirm this with Rod. I wasn't quite sure what the obsession was with having Rod be a TSA agent. I mean, other than the whole conspiracy part. But the TSA agent, other than a police officer, is a great way of putting a character in a blue costume. And then he also, back to this apartment shot, wears blue at the house. Again, blue are the good guys, right? When Rod visits the police department, he's wearing a blue flannel. And now even though she's not helpful and laughs in his face, she's wearing blue, and the other two guys are also wearing blue. Now, what does this mean? Because obviously they didn't help. All this did was foreshadow that blue, in a way, is good intention. And this is especially helpful to remember when it comes to this scene. Chris is out on that street, car crash, suicide, murder, and the police pull up. We're like, yeah, he's the goner. But because we have this color foreshadowed to us before, we know that everything will actually be okay. Now, obviously, if you remember in the script, this police scene actually went down exactly like you would expect it to, with Chris getting arrested and going to prison. But instead, it's Rod, which is great because then we've completely eliminated the maximum security prison scene, which again, I wasn't even fond of when I read it. Although I will say it's still funny because during the phone call that Chris and Rod have together, Rod does still say, "I don't forget shit you do." It never comes up again, but we'll just keep it as an inside joke between those two bros. As much as I did love this ending when I read it, I started thinking a little bit too much because I'm like, wait a minute. Did Rod steal a cop car? But if we just don't think too hard about what's presented in front of us, it's a good ending, and that's all that matters. Now, before that ending, what also was a major change is that Jeremy and Rose's position in the Great Escape sequence swapped. As I had mentioned in the script analysis video, that Chris strangled her. Now, this was obviously a genius script. Like, why not have these last two battle each other at the end? I still got with the program reading the screenplay, but I do love that Rose took on what Jeremy was originally doing, calling out for grandma, calling for grandpa, and ultimately being left behind to die. Some other things that I really loved from script to screen was here. I love how the deer hit the car in this. In the original screenplay, it said that all there was a small bloody dent in the hood, but I look at it right here, one of her headlights is missing, aka deer in the headlights, aka Chris, that's you. I also really liked this part when Andre snaps out of his trance and is screaming, get out, get out. It's Jeremy who takes him away. In the original script, it says Phil and Jeremy grab him, but I love what they did here. I love that they just made Jeremy grab him and grab him in this specific way, because it is exactly the way that he grabbed him in the opening scene. Now, obviously, Get Out made all the right changes. I love the movie. It's fun. It's perfectly casted for the most part. I really love the whole color scheme they got going on and the importance of the color blue. But this moment, to end this little bonus segment, has to be my favorite script to screen scene. It reads, Chris slips past several small groups of guests mingling. He goes upstairs to the second floor. As soon as he is out of sight and earshot, the mingling guests stop in mid-conversation. Everyone in the room waits and listens to Chris' footsteps above. It is now clear that their conversations have been fake. They are all hanging on Chris's actions. Literally the craziest thing. Anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this little bonus segment. It is always so fun to see how movies end up compared to the original screenplay. I mean, once you write a screenplay, then you have about like 30, 60, 100 different eyes interpreting your words completely differently. The production designer, the costume designer, the DP, you know, they're all putting their own spiel on the words that you wrote, and in turn, it turns into something as amazing as Get Out. You guys can join me next time for the script analysis of Mean Girls and seeing if we can make the movie on an indie level budget, aka for $700,000 or less. Thank you guys so much again for joining me. And with that, good night.